Keanu Reeves walked into a very fancy restaurant in the middle of the city. The restaurant sparkled with golden lights and everything inside looked expensive. The tables were covered with white tablecloths, and the chandeliers hanging from the ceiling made the whole place shine. People sitting at the tables wore fancy clothes, men in suits and women in elegant dresses. Everyone looked rich and important. But Keanu didn't look like the usual customers at this restaurant. He was wearing regular clothes. Old jeans, a simple shirt, and a jacket that looked soft but not fancy. His shoes were a little scuffed, not polished and shiny like the other men's shoes. He looked like a normal guy, not someone who would eat at such a fancy place. Keanu walked in calmly and chose a quiet table in the corner. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. But before he could even sit down or order food, a waitress walked up to him. Her name was Clara, and she had been working at this restaurant for a long time. She knew all the regular customers and loved serving rich and important people. She liked to feel like she was part of their world. Clara was proud of her job, but she had a bad habit. She judged people quickly just by looking at them. If someone didn't look rich or important, she believed they didn't belong in the restaurant. When she saw Keanu, she immediately thought he wasn't supposed to be there. She looked at his simple clothes and frowned. She crossed her arms and stood in front of him with a mean look on her face. "Are you sure you can afford to eat here?" she asked in a rude voice. Some people sitting at nearby tables turned their heads to listen. A few of them even chuckled, thinking this was funny. Keanu didn't seem upset at all. He just smiled politely. "Yes, I'd like to have a meal here," he said in a calm voice. Clara raised an eyebrow and let out a small laugh. She shook her head as if she couldn't believe what he had just said. "Okay, just a moment," she said in a fake sweet voice. "I need to check something." Clara turned and walked away, rolling her eyes. She went to the reception desk and typed his name into the restaurant's reservation system. She did it with big, exaggerated movements as if she was proving a point. "Just as I thought," she said to herself when she didn't find his name in the system. She walked back to Keanu and gave him a fake smile. "Well, as I expected, you don't have a reservation," she said, pretending to be sorry. "We do have some tables available, but just so you know, this is not a casual restaurant." Keanu was still not bothered by her words. He simply nodded. "I'd like to eat here," he repeated. Clara sighed dramatically as if he was making her job difficult. Then she grabbed a menu and waved for him to follow her. "All right," she said. Instead of taking him to a nice table in the middle of the restaurant, where the golden lights made everything look beautiful, she took him to a dark corner near the kitchen. It was the worst table in the whole place. It was noisy because the workers were washing dishes, and the nice music playing in the restaurant couldn't be heard very well from there. Clara placed the menu on the table with a loud thud. "Here you go," she said in a fake happy voice. "This table is perfect for you. If you need something, let me know, but only if it's really necessary, okay?" Keanu looked at the table, then at Clara. He still had a small smile on his face. "Thank you," he said calmly. "I'm sure this will be an interesting experience." Clara narrowed her eyes at him. She wasn't sure if he was joking or if he really meant it. "You're welcome," she said with sarcasm. "Just so you know, we usually keep this table for special cases. But since no one reserved it tonight, you can have it." Then she turned around and walked away quickly. A few minutes later, Clara returned to take his order. She pulled out her notepad in a dramatic way and looked at him like she was already annoyed. "Have you decided what you want?" she asked in a bored voice. "Or do you need help picking something?" Keanu looked at the menu and pointed at one of the most expensive dishes. "I'd like to try this one," he said. Clara almost laughed out loud. She covered her mouth, pretending to be polite, but she thought it was ridiculous. "Oh, of course," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The filet de Rossini." Then she tilted her head and smirked. "Just so you know, this costs $350. Are you sure?" Keanu nodded without hesitation. "Yes, it sounds wonderful." Clara smirked, still thinking he would change his mind. "All right then," she said. "Just making sure you understand the prices. We wouldn't want any surprises, would we?" Keanu stayed calm. "I'm certain," he said. Clara sighed loudly and wrote down the order. "Very well," she said. "But I should warn you, our chef likes his food to be enjoyed by people who truly understand fine dining. I hope this is good enough for you." She turned around and walked away, but then stopped and looked back at him. "Oh, and one more thing," she said. "The minimum tip expected here is 20%. Keep that in mind." Keanu simply nodded again. As he waited, he looked around, enjoying the music and the decorations. He didn't seem bothered at all by the way Clara was treating him. Soon his appetizer arrived. Clara placed the plate down roughly, making it slide a little on the table. "Here's your appetizer," she said in a mocking tone. "I hope you like it. Or at least, I hope you know what you're eating." Keanu nodded politely. "Thank you." Clara leaned in a little, trying to get a reaction from him. "You know," she said, "a lot of people order this dish and end up not liking it. It's not exactly a normal dish. But I think you'll do just fine. Good luck." Keanu just looked at her, still smiling. "It looks excellent," he said. "Thank you for your attention." Clara frowned. She was frustrated. No matter how rude she was, Keanu didn't seem upset at all. Meanwhile, the restaurant's manager, Mr. Collins, had been watching everything from a distance. He had noticed how Clara treated Keanu and was not happy about it. Mr. Collins knew exactly who Keanu Reeves was. He knew that Keanu was not just a famous actor but also one of the kindest and most generous people in Hollywood. Unlike many rich celebrities, Keanu never showed off his money. He always treated people with respect, no matter who they were. The manager decided it was time to step in. Clara, still feeling smug, returned to the front of the restaurant. She was waiting for Keanu to look at the bill and leave in embarrassment. But then, something unexpected happened. Mr. Collins walked up to Keanu's table with a big smile. "Mr. Reeves, what an honor to have you here," he said warmly. "Please allow me to move you to a better table." Clara's face turned pale. Keanu smiled and shook his head. "Thank you, but I'm quite comfortable here." Mr. Collins turned to Clara, his expression now serious. "Clara, I need to see you in my office. Right now." Clara swallowed hard. She knew she was in trouble. What happened next would teach everyone in the restaurant an important lesson. Never judge someone by their appearance. Because sometimes, the most humble-looking person in the room might just be the most important one. Clara walked away quickly, whispering something to her coworker. She rolled her eyes and muttered, "That guy won't even stay for the main meal. As soon as he sees the bill, he's going to ask for the check." Across the dining room, Keanu sat at his table, calmly eating his appetizer. He took small bites, savoring each one as if he had all the time in the world. He didn't seem to notice Clara watching him from a distance. She stood with her arms crossed, a smug smile growing on her face. "I bet he's going to ask for tap water," she whispered to another worker standing nearby. "These kinds of people always do." The other worker didn't say anything. They shifted uncomfortably, clearly not agreeing with Clara's rude comments. But Clara didn't seem to care. At a nearby table, an elderly man with neatly combed white hair watched the scene unfold. He was dressed in a sharp navy blue suit and held a glass of wine in his hand. Noticing Keanu's calm and polite manner, he raised his glass slightly in a silent toast. Keanu, noticing the gesture, nodded back with a small smile. Dinner was just beginning, but it wouldn't take long before Clara's growing frustration became a bigger problem. After Keanu placed his order, Clara made a decision. She was going to make him regret coming to this restaurant. Instead of taking his order to the kitchen right away, like she normally would, she deliberately delayed it. First, she stopped to chat with a well-dressed couple sitting at the center of the dining room. She laughed loudly at their jokes, flipping her hair over her shoulder as if she had all the time in the world. Then she took a drink to another table, even though it wasn't her responsibility. Meanwhile, Keanu simply waited. He sat quietly, not looking around in annoyance, not sighing impatiently, just waiting. Clara walked past his table multiple times, making sure he saw her. Every time Keanu looked up, she quickly turned away and walked faster, pretending to be too busy to help him. The older man in the navy blue suit kept watching. He wasn't the only one. Other customers had started to notice the way Clara was ignoring Keanu. Some whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disapproval. Finally, after a long wait, the elderly man stood up and walked over to Keanu's table. He approached with a kind smile. "Good evening, young man," he said, his voice polite but firm. "I hope you don't mind me interrupting, but I couldn't help but notice that you've been waiting a long time." Keanu looked up and smiled. "Good evening. Don't worry, it's fine," he said in his usual calm voice. The older man chuckled softly and leaned in, lowering his voice. "You know, sometimes when people treat us badly, it's a test of our patience. But staying calm is a great sign of strength." Before Keanu could respond, Clara suddenly appeared beside them. Her voice was smoother than usual, but there was a sharpness to it. "Sir, can I help you with something?" she asked the elderly man. "I wouldn't want you to disturb our customer." The elderly man narrowed his eyes slightly, but his voice remained gentle. "Don't worry, miss. I was simply greeting this gentleman. It's rare to meet someone so patient." Clara sighed dramatically and gestured toward the older man's table. "Well, perhaps you should return to your seat and enjoy your dinner," she said, her tone clearly impatient. Keanu simply observed the exchange, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for stopping by," he said to the elderly man with a respectful nod. The elderly man nodded back before returning to his seat. But before he did, he cast one last look at Clara, one filled with disappointment. Clara, however, pretended not to notice. Even after this, Clara still wasn't finished with her petty behavior. She had another plan. When Keanu's food was finally ready, instead of bringing it out right away, she took her time. She went into the kitchen, saw his plate sitting under the warming lamp, but didn't take it. Instead, she stopped to chat with the chefs, joking around as if she had nothing important to do. Then she walked back out and attended another table first. When she finally brought the food to Keanu, she placed it down with little care. "Here's your meal. Hope you enjoy it," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Then, with a fake sweet smile, she added, "Oh, and if it's too fancy for you, just let us know. We can always bring you something more affordable." Keanu smiled and nodded politely. "It looks great. Thank you." Clara smirked and leaned in slightly, whispering just loud enough for him to hear, "Are you sure? It's a very fancy dish. It might be a little too much for someone like you." Keanu remained completely calm. "I'm sure. Thanks for your concern." Clara clenched her jaw. No matter what she did, she couldn't get a reaction out of him. She spun around and stormed off. At the bar, Clara muttered to another worker. "He's pretending to be polite, but I can tell he's uncomfortable," she said with a laugh. "I bet he doesn't even know what he's eating." Her coworker sighed. "Maybe he just wants to have dinner, Clara. Maybe we should treat him like any other customer." Clara scoffed. "Like any other customer? Did you see his boots? He doesn't belong here." Meanwhile, at their table, the elegant couple who had been watching whispered to each other. "She's awful," the woman said. "He's being so polite, but she keeps trying to embarrass him." "I agree," her husband replied. "This is disgraceful. We should speak to the manager." Keanu continued eating peacefully, unaffected by the growing attention. Clara returned to his table to collect his plate. "So, how was it? Did it meet your expectations?" she asked, forcing a fake smile. Keanu looked her in the eyes and answered, "It was excellent. Please tell the chefs they did a great job." Clara's fake smile faltered. She had expected him to complain. Frustrated, she turned away, muttering under her breath, "He might be smiling now, but let's see if he's still smiling when the bill comes." Keanu, still sitting calmly, simply watched the room with a small, knowing smile. Clara, still annoyed, decided to make her insults even more obvious. After serving Keanu coffee, she spoke loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "You know, it's hard to keep a high-class restaurant when just anyone thinks they can walk in," she said, looking directly at Keanu. Her coworker looked uncomfortable. "Clara, maybe we should—" Clara cut him off. "That's why we have a reservation system," she continued. "It helps us avoid situations like this." Around the room, people stopped talking. Some shook their heads, others whispered among themselves. The elegant couple gasped in shock. "This is outrageous," the woman whispered. "She's humiliating him on purpose." The older man in the navy blue suit took a slow sip of his wine. "This has gone too far," he muttered. Keanu, still seated, stayed calm. His peaceful demeanor made Clara even more frustrated. Clara walked back to Keanu's table, smirking. "I hope you're enjoying your experience here," she said. "It's always interesting to have different kinds of people here." Keanu looked at her, his voice steady. "Different? What do you mean?" Clara laughed nervously. "Oh, don't take it the wrong way. Our customers usually have more traditional look. It's rare to see someone like you here." Silence fell over the room. Everyone was watching now. Keanu stayed quiet for a moment. Then finally he spoke. "You're right. Maybe I should handle this differently." Clara blinked in confusion. Just then the restaurant manager appeared. When he saw Keanu, his face changed. He hurried over. "Mr. Reeves," he exclaimed. "I didn't know you were dining with us today. Please, let me know if there's anything I can do." Clara's face went pale. She turned to Keanu, her mouth opening slightly in shock. Keanu looked at the manager for a moment, his eyes calm but serious. Then he turned back to Clara. His voice was steady and firm but not angry. "Let's talk about how we treat people," he said. The entire restaurant became silent. It was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Everyone stopped eating, stopped talking, and just stared at Keanu's table, waiting to see what would happen next. The manager of Lumiere was a tall man who always looked neat and professional. He usually carried himself with great confidence, but at this moment he seemed nervous. His hands twitched slightly as he adjusted his suit. He ignored Clara and turned directly to Keanu. "Mr. Reeves," he said quickly, his voice full of respect. "I am so sorry for not recognizing you sooner. It is an honor to have you here tonight. Please let me know how I can make your visit better." Clara, who had been so sure she was in control of the situation, suddenly froze. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. "Mr. Reeves? He knows him? What is going on here?" she thought, her heart pounding in her chest. Keanu gave the manager a small, kind smile. "Thank you, but there's no need to worry. I'm fine," he said. "I just want to have a quick conversation with your staff if that's okay." The manager's face changed. He knew something was wrong. He could feel it. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. Whatever you need," he said immediately. Then he turned to Clara with a sharp, disappointed look. Clara felt her stomach twist into knots. Her face turned pale and she suddenly felt very small. She tried to explain herself. I didn't know. I thought." The manager cut her off. His voice was low, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in his tone. "Thought what, Clara?" he asked. "That this customer, who happens to be one of the owners of this restaurant, didn't deserve respect?" Clara felt her throat tighten. She tried again to defend herself. He didn't say who he was. And he looked, but she stopped talking. She realized that anything she said would only make things worse. Keanu finally broke the silence. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that filled the room. "I don't need to say who I am to be treated with respect," he said simply. "That shouldn't matter. Every person who walks through these doors, no matter how they look, should be welcomed with kindness." The entire restaurant was stunned. Some guests exchanged nervous glances. Others whispered among themselves. At a nearby table, an older man nodded approvingly. A couple sitting across from him smiled at each other. A man leaned over and whispered to his wife, "I knew there was something special about him. He has a presence you can't ignore." His wife nodded. "And look at how he's handling this. With such grace." The manager turned back to Clara, his expression now a mix of frustration and disappointment. "Clara, I want a full explanation of your behavior after your shift. But for now, stay away from this table." "I will handle it from here," he said firmly. Clara opened her mouth to protest, but the look in the manager's eyes told her it was useless. She quickly turned and walked away, her face burning with embarrassment. Keanu took a deep breath. Then he stood up and looked around at the other guests. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting to hear what he would say. This restaurant was built to be a place where everyone feels welcome, no matter how they dress or where they come from, he said. But today that didn't happen. "I believe we can learn from this." The dining room remained silent, absorbing his words. The manager looked both uneasy and impressed by how Keanu was handling the situation. Keanu turned to the manager. "I'd like to meet with all the staff after closing. There are some important things we need to discuss." The manager nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. And again, I am very sorry." Keanu sat back down and slowly the restaurant returned to normal. But the guests continued whispering about what had just happened. Later that night, after all the customers had left and the restaurant was empty, the staff gathered in the dining room. Keanu stood in the center. His presence filled the space. He looked around, meeting the eyes of each employee. His expression was calm but serious. "We all make mistakes," he said. "What really matters is what we do after those mistakes." The room was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. "Today we saw a problem," Keanu continued. "It wasn't just about bad service. It was about something bigger. We saw what happens when people judge others too quickly. When they don't have kindness." Keanu paused, letting his words sink in. His eyes landed on Clara, who was sitting in the back of the room. Her eyes were filled with tears and she looked ashamed. "Clara," he said gently but firmly, "I know today was a mistake. And mistakes can be fixed, if you are willing to learn from them. What you do next will show who you really are." Clara wiped her tears and nodded. I never thought about it that way before," she admitted. "I was so focused on the restaurant's image, on making sure everything looked perfect, that I forgot what really matters. I forgot that every person has value no matter how they look. I promise, Mr. Reeves, I will change." Keanu gave her a small, encouraging smile. "That promise is to yourself, Clara. Not to me," he said. "Real change comes from inside. And if you ever need help, I'll be here." Clara nodded again, looking determined. Keanu turned back to the rest of the staff. "In this world, it's easy to judge people based on how they look," he said. "But I want you to think about something. What happens when we choose kindness instead? What happens when we take a moment to see the person beyond their clothes, beyond their appearance? Keanu took a small step forward, his hands in his pockets. Everyone is fighting a battle we can't see, he said. The person who seems out of place might be having the hardest day of their life. The one who doesn't dress fancy might have achieved more than you could imagine. A little kindness, especially towards someone who seems like they don't deserve it, can change everything. The room was silent. Some of the staff looked emotional. Others looked down, thinking about their own actions. Keanu's voice softened. Kindness isn't about big actions, he said. It's about small choices, every single day. It's about treating everyone like they matter. Because they do. And that's what makes a person and a place truly special. The manager stepped forward. Mr. Reeves, your message was clear. We will work hard to make Lumiere the kind of place you dreamed of. Thank you for reminding us what really matters. Keanu nodded and gave a peaceful smile. As he stepped outside, the streets of Beverly Hills sparkled under the city lights. He stopped for a moment and looked back at Lumiere's entrance. He smiled softly, thinking about everything that had happened. Tonight wasn't just about a restaurant or a bad experience. It was about something bigger, making places where people feel seen, heard, and valued. As he walked away, he thought about his final message. If people remember just one thing from tonight, I hope it's this. In a world where you can be anything, choose to be kind. Real strength isn't in judging others, it's in accepting them. And in the little choices we make every day, we shape the world and the people we become. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories filled with adventure, mystery, and excitement. Your support means the world and it helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.